The neon lights of the diner's sign, Eddie's Eats, reflected off the wet pavement, casting a gaudy glow over the deserted streets of Pico Mundo, California. Inside, a lone customer, Jules, nursed a lukewarm cup of coffee, her eyes fixed on the TV mounted in the corner, where a grainy VHS tape played a perpetual loop of vintage game shows. The air was thick with the smell of stale grease and yesterday's dreams. Behind the counter, Eddie himself, a man with a pompadour hairdo and a penchant for plaid pants, wiped down the counter with a dirty rag, his eyes fixed on Jules with an unspoken understanding. He knew her type, the kind that only came out at night, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the town's desperation was palpable. Outside, the sky was a deep shade of indigo, like someone had creased the fabric of the universe. A faint hum, almost imperceptible, vibrated through the air, like the quiet buzzing of a fluorescent light about to flicker out. It was a sound that only the most attuned could hear, a sound that signaled the approaching convergence of the mundane and the strange. Jules felt it, a shiver running down her spine as she raised her cup to her lips, her eyes never leaving the TV screen, where a contestant on The Price is Right was about to win a year's supply of toilet paper. As Jules took a sip of her coffee, the TV screen flickered, and for a split second, the contestant's face warped, his eyes stretching into ellipses, his grin twisting into a macabre smile. The camera zoomed in on his pupils, which flashed like tiny cameras, capturing the audience's screams. Jules' eyes widened, but when she looked again, the image had reverted to its usual mundane self. The contestant was once more beaming with excitement, clutching his toilet paper prize. Eddie, too, had seen something. His wiping motion slowed, his gaze snagging on the TV. For a moment, the diner's sounds, the sizzle of the grill, the murmur of the jukebox receded, leaving only the soft hum, a sound that now seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. The air vibrated with anticipation, like the seconds before a storm bursts. Jules pushed her cup away, her eyes never leaving the TV. Eddie's gaze locked onto hers, a silent understanding passing between them. They were the only two awake in a world fast asleep, the only ones attuned to the frequencies that whispered secrets in the dead of night. The diner's neon sign outside seemed to pulse in rhythm with Jules' heartbeat, a Morse code warning of an impending collision between the worlds. Without a word, Jules slid out of the booth, her eyes never leaving the TV. Eddie's rag fell still, his hands hovering above the counter as if poised to snatch a fly from the air. The TV screen flickered once more, the contestant's face distorting, his eyes flashing like camera shutters, capturing the audience's screams. This time, the image held, the screen warping into a kaleidoscope of colors, a psychedelic abyss that pulled Jules in with an otherworldly gravity. As Jules approached the TV, the colors on the screen swirled around her, a maelstrom of pinks, blues, and yellows that seemed to solidify into tendrils of light, reaching out to ensnare her. The contestant's face, still distorted, began to speak, his voice a low, hypnotic hum that resonated deep within Jules' chest. "The price is not right," he intoned, his eyes flashing like camera shutters, each snap illuminating a new, surreal landscape. Eddie, transfixed, slowly rose from behind the counter, his eyes fixed on Jules as she reached out to touch the TV screen. The air seemed to thicken, the diner's sounds muffled by an unseen force that wrapped itself around them. The neon sign outside pulsed faster, its rhythm quickening to match the tempo of Jules' racing heart. As her fingers grazed the screen, the TV exploded in a riot of color, the contestant's face melting into a Dali-esque landscape of dripping clocks, distorted objects, and impossible geometry. Jules felt herself being pulled through the screen, the TV's surface rippling like water as she stepped into the vortex. The diner around her blurred, the sounds of the night slipping away like sand between her fingers. Eddie's cry of "Jules, no," was lost in the tumult, as she stepped into the heart of the TV, surrounded by a kaleidoscope of colors, her footfalls echoing through the twisted corridors of the broadcast. In the instant before she vanished, Jules caught a glimpse of the town beyond the diner, its streets transformed into a surrealist's playground. The buildings twisted, their walls melting like wax, as the very fabric of Pico Mundo seemed to unravel, revealing the hidden frequencies that Jules had always suspected lurked beneath the surface. As she plunged deeper into the TV's labyrinthine corridors, Jules' senses reeled from the onslaught of distorted images and dissonant sounds. The air vibrated with the hum of 1,000 TV channels, each one a portal to a parallel universe, where the fabric of reality was stretched to its limits. She stumbled through a maze of broken sets, abandoned studios, and discarded scripts, the detritus of 1,000 forgotten shows. The walls ran with rivulets of static, as if the very walls were bleeding videotape. Every step echoed through the chambers, punctuated by the distant whispers of forgotten celebrities, their faces flickering like ghosts on the walls. Somewhere, a laugh track cackled maniacally, as if the sitcoms themselves were conspiring against her. Ahead, a bank of TV screens pulsed with an otherworldly energy, their screens reflecting Jules' own face, distorted and multiplied, as if she were staring into the abyss of her own psyche. Suddenly, a voice whispered in her ear, "You're on the air, Jules." The words sent a shiver down her spine as she recognized the voice, her own, yet not her own. The TV's corridors seemed to converge on a single door, adorned with a sign that read Studio 13. With a sense of inevitability, Jules pushed the door open, revealing a studio filled with a live audience, their faces a blur of anticipation. On the stage, a solitary figure stood, its face a mask of Jules' own features, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The figure beckoned, its voice whispering, "Welcome to the show that never ends." As Jules approached, the audience erupted into applause, their laughter and cheers swirling into a maelstrom of sound that threatened to consume her. The figure on stage beckoned, its eyes flashing like camera shutters, capturing Jules' very soul. The figure's eyes burned with an intensity that made Jules' skin crawl, as if they were two lenses focusing on a single, terrible truth. The applause reached a fever pitch, and Jules felt herself being drawn toward the stage, as if by an unseen force. Suddenly, the lights dimmed, and a single spotlight slashed through the darkness, bathing Jules in an unforgiving glare. The figure on stage raised its hand, and the audience fell silent, awaiting the cue to begin. In the hush, Jules heard the soft whisper of Eddie's voice, "Jules, don't," but it was too late. The figure on stage began to speak, its voice like a rusty gate. "Welcome, Jules, to The Eternal Repeat, the show where the past, present, and future collide in an endless loop of terror and delight." The audience erupted into applause once more, as the figure beckoned Jules closer. With each step, the spotlight narrowed, until Jules felt herself trapped in a cylinder of light, her every move scrutinized by the unseen forces controlling the show. The figure on stage reached out, its hand closing around Jules' wrist like a vice. As it pulled her closer, Jules saw her own face reflected in its eyes, distorted and warped, like a funhouse mirror. The figure's voice whispered in her ear, "You're on the air, Jules, forever." In that instant, the studio exploded into chaos, the audience screaming, the lights strobing, and the TV screens around her erupting into a cacophony of static. Jules felt herself being pulled backward, through the corridors of the TV, back into the diner, where Eddie waited, his eyes wide with fear. But as she stumbled out of the TV, Jules realized that something had changed. The diner was different, the neon sign outside twisted, like a writhing snake. Eddie's face was distorted, his eyes flashing like camera shutters, capturing her screams. The TV hummed in the background, its screen flickering with an otherworldly energy, as if the show would never end. Eddie's eyes locked onto hers, his gaze holding a strange, almost feral intensity. Jules felt a shiver run down her spine as he whispered, "You're back, Jules, but you're not alone." Suddenly, the diner's doors burst open, and a procession of figures, identical to the one on stage, filed in, their faces blank, their eyes aglow with an otherworldly energy. They formed a semicircle around Jules, their eyes fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. Eddie took a step back, his eyes never leaving Jules, as if he was retreating from something ancient and malevolent. The figures began to whisper, their voices a hushed chant. The eternal repeat, the eternal repeat. Jules' heart raced as the figures closed in, their eyes burning brighter, like embers from a hellish fire. The air was heavy with an electric charge, as if the very fabric of reality was about to tear apart. In the background, the TV hummed louder, its screen flashing with an otherworldly energy, as if it was the source of the madness unfolding before her. The figures inched closer, their whispers growing louder, until Jules felt herself being pulled back into the TV, back into the abyss of the eternal repeat. In a desperate bid to escape, Jules lunged at Eddie, grabbing his arm, pleading, "Get me out of here!" But Eddie's eyes had changed, his gaze now identical to the figures surrounding her, his voice a whispered chant, "The eternal repeat, the eternal repeat." As the figures closed in, Jules realized that Eddie was no longer her friend, but a gateway to the abyss, a portal to the infinite loop of terror and despair known as the eternal repeat. And in that instant, the diner, the TV, and the world itself seemed to blur, as Jules stumbled into the very heart of madness.